Uncharted Among Thieves is a phenomenal game. Even over a decade later, it remains many people's top video game of all time. However, it isn't just the game that people remember it for, but how it changed the way the wider populace spoke about the PlayStation 3. When Sony's third console was announced in summer 2005, no one quite realised how arrogant Sony had become. Having exploded onto the console market with the disruptive PlayStation, they'd followed it up with one of the best-selling consoles of all time, hands down winning 2 hardware generations, both in units sold and critical reception. However, when the PlayStation 3 was announced, not only was it not able to release anywhere close to Microsoft's own next-generation console, giving the Xbox 360 nearly a full year as the only high-definition console on the market, and time to build up a dedicated player base, it gave developers time to adjust to making HD games using that architecture. Apparently Sony was so committed to their cell processor that powered the console, they almost didn't install a GPU in the machine until the last minute. That meant when the PlayStation 3 did launch, although it was technically more powerful than the 360, only the dedicated Sony developers really had time to design their games around that console, meaning that many games that were playable on both actually performed far worse on the PS3 compared to the Xbox 360. Although not a launch game itself, the first Uncharted from Naughty Dog Studios, Drake's Fortune, was well reviewed, and it was marked as a good example of how Sony could distinguish themselves against Microsoft's offering. However, given that at launch Sony's console was around $200 more expensive than the alternative, many critics and gamers were left waiting for a core game that would justify making the jump to the PlayStation 3. I remember memes at the time calling for that killer app that Sony needed. When it came, many people hailed Uncharted 2 as that app. That's how important it was. Was it really worth that attention? Examining it mechanically, it almost amazed me how people reacted so differently to this game compared to its predecessor. Mechanically, the foundations were all there before. Yes, the sequel does introduce some new elements, but essentially this is a very similar setup where you control adventurer Nathan Drake on gun-toting, cover-based hijinks in search of lost ancient treasures. There are puzzles to solve, cutscenes to watch, and collectibles to scour the world for to unlock all manner of side content. What most players notice, however, is the increased abundance of set pieces. From the train journey, the helicopter shootout, the tank chase, the museum heist. The game is full of distinct moments, all designed to get your heart pumping. Whereas the original game was largely set on just 2 islands, and therefore offered only a small variety of environments, Uncharted 2 goes out of its way to make every level and area feel distinct. In terms of what you're doing, it's much the same as the previous game, but the context and your surroundings are turned on their head. There is an almost constant feeling of peril, as Nathan is either running towards, or actually more often away, from something at every moment. The gunfights still occur, but they feel less like waves of enemies stepping into small purpose-built arenas, and more like a series of obstacles that Nathan must overcome to proceed. They are, in fact, still hordes of cannon fodder stepping into purpose-built arenas, but context changes everything. However, it's not the set pieces that I think set this game apart from its predecessor. As well paced as it is, replaying Uncharted 2 reminded me of one of the most important changes that the design team made. It's the verticality. Now, the original Uncharted, following the Tomb Raider mould of level design, featured plenty of climbing to navigate the abandoned tombs and lost cities. However, whilst often this meant travelling up or down, there was a strict separation between traversal and combat. In Drake's Fortune, Nathan would climb to a platform, stop and engage in a shootout with people on that platform, and then progress. Among Thieves introduced many more ladders into the same areas that your enemies inhabit. This helps the game move away from the Gears of War style cover-based shooter to become something that encourages you to move around more to get behind your opponents. Also, climbing itself can provide cover, and you can pull out your gun and fight whilst hanging from a rope ladder or a street sign. Technically, this did happen in the previous game, but it was largely incidental. If Drake was fighting, he had 2 feet on the ground at all times. Among Thieves wants you to feel how important this vertical sense is from the very start. The first set piece features you leading Drake up a dangling train carriage to safety. the camera panning around to try and instill in you at all times a sense of just how high up you are, and how far away the ground below must be. Nathan's plan for the museum heist features him climbing up from the sewers below. Then his method of traversing the city under bombardment is to climb up from street to rooftops. Nathan Drake is constantly moving up or down, to the point that when the game finally directs you to stop climbing and just move forwards, fighting your way along an armoured train, it comes as something of a break compared to what came before. It's this constant variety that makes Among Thieves as memorable as it is, and why for so many people it stands head over heels above its predecessor. It's the same Nathan, using the same weapons, solving pretty much the same puzzles, but the world around him has completely changed. New characters were brought in to complement the old cast, and Naughty Dog drew a top-tier voice cast as always. The story builds upon the first, drawing a potential but only sparingly acknowledged love triangle between Nathan, Chloe and Alina. There are cutscenes, particularly when traversing from one part of the world to another, but so much dialogue is provided through the gameplay. What the game does do successfully, compared to the first one, is deliberately build up the main antagonist to be a real threat throughout the experience, rather than try the shady cut and run approach of the predecessor. As a result, when Nathan comes up against the Zarevich in a fight to the death in Shambhala, it's a moment that has been built up brilliantly throughout the whole game, giving you a massive sense of satisfaction. The first game wanted to be Indiana Jones, but this one wants you to be Rambo. Alongside the campaign, there was a very competent online multiplayer when it launched. However, this has been stripped from all of the re-releases, as it really is the same game that has been iterated on in each of the Naughty Dog sequels since. The multiplayer servers were shut down in 2019, a full 10 years after the game originally launched, and retrospectively hailed by many as one of the best online experiences on the console. It was just another area where this game excelled, winning several awards for both writing, graphics, audio, art direction, and overall was for many people 2009's Game of the Year. However, with perspective, Uncharted 2 sold well, but it's not clear that it really was in itself a system seller. It was the third first-party Sony title to reach 1 million units sold on the console, and it was the second fastest-selling game behind Metal Gear Solid 4, but its release was only the start of a global upwards trend in Sony's fortunes. In terms of critical acclaim, Uncharted 2 generated sustained interest that remained all the way up to the end of the console generation, during which time the team that produced this went on to make an acclaimed sequel to round out the Uncharted trilogy, and a new adventure series titled The Last of Us. And at the end of the day, despite their early and apparently unsurmountable lead, Sony and Microsoft's console war appears to have ended up in a draw. Without a slew of games like Uncharted 2 around 2009, that reversal in fortune probably wouldn't have happened. So it's no wonder people remember this game fondly, because for a significant number of people, this wasn't necessarily the game that they bought the PlayStation 3 console for, but the Uncharted series was the one that ended up defining it. And for almost everyone, that means this game will go down in history as the moment Sony's fortunes changed for the better.